Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Shore Visiting Professor Lecture for 2024. My name is Gina Ripple. I'm the chair of the Architecture Department, and it is my pleasure today to introduce to you our Shore Visiting Professors this year, Andrea Soto and Alejandro Guerrero. I'm going to say a few words about them, but before I get started, I want to mention that today's lecture is also counting as continuing education credits for the landscape architects in the room. There's a list at the back of the lecture hall. Please ensure that you sign up if you're interested in those credits. I also want to mention that we're very lucky to have this professorship here at the school. This is designed to enable us to, every year, to attract and nationally and internationally known architects to the faculty to lead a graduate level studio. And this year, Andrea Soto and Alejandro Guerrero offer a cross-disciplinary perspective with backgrounds in architecture and landscape architecture in an internationally recognized architectural practice, Atelier ARS, in Guadalajara, Mexico. Alejandro Guerrero received his Master of Architecture Criticism and Project degree at the Polytechnic University of Catalonia in 2006. He taught from 2006 to 2020 at Iteso University and was a lecturer and critic at Quito Architecture Biennial in 2022. Andrea Soto graduated from Iteso University in 2011 and won the ChemEx architect Marcelo Zambrano Scholarship, enabling her studies in the Master of Landscape Architecture at Harvard University. She graduated with distinction and with special recognition by the American Society of Landscape Architects, ASLA. Guerrero and Soto received several highly influential awards in the last several years, including 3 project nominations for the Mies Crown Hall Americas Prize, silver medal in the Enrique Mendelsohn Award in 2023 in Berlin, Germany, the 2015 Emerging Voices Award by the Architecture League of New York, the 2015 Design Vanguard from Architectural Record, silver medal in the 15th Mexican Architecture Biennale, first prize at the 3rd Latin American Biennial of Landscape Architecture, and finalist designation from Architectural Review's 2018 Emerging Architects Prize. They've been lecturers at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, at the University of British Columbia, UVA, and the Dallas Architecture Forum. As Schur professors, Guerrero and Soto are broadening the perspectives and references of UVA students while also contributing their expertise and practice to the advanced graduate education. Please join me in welcoming them tonight.
So, first of all, I would like to thank Gina for making possible our visiting professorship, to Brad Cantrell for recommending and offering us such a wonderful experience of teaching a studio, along with Sawyer Davis, who's here, who has made everything more enjoyable. And of course, to the Dean of the School of Architecture, Malo Andre Utzon, for giving us this opportunity.
We are very glad and honored to have this experience to teach in such a relevant university. And we want to thank all the UVA team and people behind that have helped us through all this process. Our lecture is named Rituals of Architecture in the Landscape, an idea we have pursued and built with the passing of time. Through the years, we have found that certain subjects remain in our minds and in our work and have become guidelines for our research and production as architects. We have named them as axes of our practice, and they reflect about our human relationship with the world through our gaze.
We're a couple, so it's good that we come closer. The first axis is about the relationship of architecture with nature that we understand through the concept of landscape. For this analysis, we have learned not only from the relationship of other cultures with their natural habitats, but also we continue to observe and reflect about our own landscape. We found the Trans-Mexican volcanic belt that crosses our country has been a profound theme of investigation of Mexican painters and architects that has determined not only the geology, the flora, and the topography of our region, but has also determined our culture. This volcanic condition of the landscape shaped our vision and has made us understand and produce architecture in a certain way.
We have become aware how those landscapes have determined our personal interests as we see them in certain themes we try to evoke in our work: horizon, vastness, remoteness, gravity, and many others. Our second axis is the intrinsic condition of architecture as discipline through the subject of history. For us, the presence of the past is a very important matter in any project, as we include our practice in the idea of continuity. As our dear friend, the architect Carles Muro, told us once, I'm quoting, unlike the historian, for the architect in the present, all the history of architecture is at the same distance. For us, that means we learn and practice by observing the history of architecture as a whole. From the Doric temple to the modern masterpieces, we consider architecture as a story about tradition and transformation. Tradition, of course, is a very strong word that we feel very close to, but we always try not to fall only in a nostalgic understanding of it. As many other practices, the notion of typology is very important in our process, but we always try to add another layers of themes, architectural or not, that for us have become subjects that can give sense and meaning to an entire project such as penumbra, excavation, sacredness, tectonic, perspective, void, monumentality, and so on. Their use has to do with the analysis of every place. They have no style, epoch, and do not belong to any particular culture. Adopting tradition can be understood as recalling the past of the discipline through the idea of transformation. We name this part of the process nostalgia and transgression.
Guadalajara, the place where we live and practice, has a strong tradition in architecture. A certain distance with Mexico City and other major capitals of the world perhaps made possible a cultural process of introspection, mainly during the 20th century. That condition produced very well-known architects as Luis Barragán, writers like Juan Rulfo, and painters like José Clemente Orozco. It didn't mean they were secluded from the world. It meant that having known the world, they came back to recognize themselves within their own culture.
We feel we belong to a current local scene in Guadalajara where different artists, designers, ceramists, artisans, and of course architects explore subjects related to the validity of local traditions, cultural identity, and heritage, expressed through their own production. Just to describe briefly, the work of Gonzalo Lebrija, for example, reflects on time as a phenomena that includes every artistic manifestation. Cerámica Suro, on the other hand, has been the vehicle for the production of many artists working locally and has transcended frontiers to become the ceramist producer for many artists around the world, mainly in America. And finally, Julia and Renata, the fashion designers, have explored through their art the possibilities of local textile production and in an avant-garde design, many times evoking the Mexican landscape.
The third axis of our practice is the relationship of architecture with human life that we understand through the concepts of rituals and myths. We understand the ritual as the transcendence of the function at the level of a significant act as it is described by the historian Spiro Kostov. For us, architecture is a background where human life can display its cultural manifestations. A procession, for example, is a ritualized act of many people going from one place to another for some public or solemn purpose, often religious, as we can observe in this image by the Mexican photographer Mariana Jampolsky. We believe architectural form can be the result of a ritual. We began to think about rituals and their relationship with architecture when we designed our first memorial in Novasem in the memory of the founder. And over the years, we have been able to observe the use and appropriation the people have had with the memorial space. Every year, the place is interbeing with the typical altars of Mexican culture. And the reason why this project is so important to us is because we have been able to witness the important role that rituals have for architecture.
The reflection and experience we had with the Novasem Memorial eventually led us to see ourselves involved in another memorial project. On September 19, 2017, a magnitude 7.1 earthquake hit several regions of the country, Mexico. In Mexico City, the Enrique Rebsamen School came to public light in a particular way because 19 girls and boys and 7 adults lost their lives. The relatives of the victims organized a competition by invitation of for a permanent memorial in a public park, which will comply one of the recommendations issued by the National Human Rights Commission, which pointed out various governmental irregularities in terms of construction and civil protection.
Different ideas informed our proposal. The enclosed garden is a direct reference to the Hortus Conclusus, the biblical hortus that represents the idea of paradise, the Garden of Eden. The containment of the space through walls or other types of delimitations is fundamental, since it marks the difference between the external world and the internal earthly garden.
Architecturally speaking, another reference that gave meaning to our proposal were the playgrounds that Aldo van Eyck built in Amsterdam in the 40s. These small constructions, in addition to responding to a social need in the public space, were characterized by a remarkable variety of interventions. His playgrounds weren't exactly imposed games, but rather spaces where elements and limits induced children to the ritual of free play. A change of material on the pavement, a very low enclosure, a small mound were sufficient reasons to allude to the minds of the children who ended up using the space in a richer way. They are spaces where the act of playing has been ritualized. The proposal for the memorial took advantage of the persistence of a parking lot to build an enclosed garden that had the quality of being understood as a space for contemplation, a sacro bosco, the landscape archetype of the clearing in the forest. We can see all the layers that configure the limit that protects the inner space that we consider to be sacred. Based on the idea that a public space is safer to the extent that its elements do not imply a visual obstruction, and with the aim of making it inclusive and accessible, the construction of the ring was raised almost 3 meters, with the ability to delimit the central space understood as the core of the monument.
The circular enclosure of our project, surrounded by 2 rows of magnolias and low vegetation, contains in turn another series of internal circular spaces, which gradually configure small thresholds around a body of water. The result is an internal void that can be discovered and experienced by wandering through the park into an enclosed space that reunites people around a reflecting pool with the 26 stelae that represent each of the victims. The pond is a space not only to be observed, but inhabited as well, while the stones placed on the water allow the visitor to walk on them and thus interact with the stone and granite stelae and to get closer in a more intimate position. There are also messages written by the families that communicate the tragedy set up in the frieze of the ring. Each of the monoliths that were placed in the pond have the name or initials of the victims engraved and also contain symbolic figures according to the wishes of each family. These symbolic figures represent mainly hummingbirds and butterflies, but for us, it was also important to manifest them in real terms by attracting pollinators through the use of specific plant species.
The memorial, which was initially conceived as a monument where the ritual of reunion and commemoration take place, ended up becoming a physical vestige of a social tragedy, a witness of a social living force to question and sue the authority about its responsibility in the tragedy. Finally, after 5 years, on February 2nd of 2023, government authorities offered public apologies to the victims and relatives of those who lost their lives in the collapse of the Enrique Rebsamen School during the earthquake. That authority responsible for the tragedy is the actual president of the country. The same period, we worked with another public commission that made us explore, but from different lenses, the human component through rituals and myth. The project is about the intervention of an existing auditorium and its expansion into a cultural center that was requested by the Jalisco Ministry of Culture. This program was an effort that aimed to decentralize the culture and to disseminate it in different regions of Jalisco. Our project is located in the lakeside of Chapala, the biggest lake in Mexico, where our current study is taking place, in fact. The North Lake shore is the most important settlement of foreigners in the country due to the benefits of its climate and peaceful lifestyle.
For us, it was very important that our project could communicate part of the cultural history of the site. That is why we took on the task of investigating and knowing some of the founding myths of the ancient Wixárika culture, which has been one of the most important ceremonial centers in Lake Chapala. In the Paleozoic era, the lake was part of a fjord from the Pacific Ocean, and due to volcanic activity, the Trans-Mexican volcanic belt that we mentioned before was born. This phenomenon divided that great inland sea to which Lake Chapala belonged, being delimited by topographic eminences, where the presence of the lake is a fundamental factor for the understanding of the founding cultures of the place. The myths of this pre-Hispanic culture allude to those processes of topographic and aquifer formation of the place. Science and myth are interlinked. The legend tells us about the emergence of the lake through a primeval flood, then a drying process in which a goddess sank her walking stick into the seabed, causing the water to drop and also producing the formation of an islet, in the same place that today is the most important sanctuary. Our intervention tries to narrate some of these myths through simple elements understandable for anyone that we address in different moments as part of a landscape narrative.
For the configuration of the new cultural center, the starting point of our intervention was the recovery of the pre-existing on the site. The auditorium already contained a portico with brick walls that we recognized as the most valuable element of the pre-existence in architectural terms. The pre-existing brick walls were the perfect pretext for us to take the decision of using traditional clay elements from the region, using different formats and construction systems, in order to produce a sense of unity and in turn as a way to help perpetuate the artisan knowledge still found in the region. The main lesson consisted in witnessing the enormous nobleness and expressive capacity of handmade brick. Although none of these former buildings had heritage value, we decided to recover them and integrate them into the new complex, to which we adapted 3 new elements: a library, as the facade for the complex, a longitudinal service building with music, dance, classrooms, open-air amphitheater, and finally, a large central reflecting pool. The location of the new buildings were done so that they function as limits, so that their presence conveys the idea of enclosure.
As part of the spatial system in the master plan, we decided to place the library building facing the avenue where it could have a strong urban presence. A large pond with 2 planters evoke a miniature landscape of the lake with its 2 islands. That's the first landscape element of the myth narrative. The brick vault is a gesture that connects with the traditional architectural language and those that connects with the traditional architectural language and thus producing a sense of belonging with local people. But for us as architects, it is also a form that connects with the history of architecture as a whole. It represents the presence of the past in contemporary architecture, an attitude not far from some ideas of the postmodern period of architecture, but certainly very different in spirit.
The building was sold in section with a sawtooth roof that illuminates the reading room on the first floor and a brick vault at the ground floor as a unique architectural form that communicate the idea of the main entrance to the complex, a threshold. This building was built entirely with brick load-bearing walls and shows the possibilities of artisan labor even for public commissions, where it's very difficult to apply these construction methods. In the interior upper space, the sawtooth roof allows the entry of diffuse light by the use of glass blocks. The interior were made using terracotta colored cement plastering to give a sense of uniformity to the entire building. It is actually a multipurpose space in which children's activities, book presentations, and all kinds of meetings are held.
The construction of the new cultural center was interpreted by us as a great opportunity to produce a new public space for the region. So we decided to design it as a set of separate buildings between squares, alleys, and gardens that the community can use and enjoy even if they're not attending any performance. That's the reason why we took the decision to occupy the central space with a landscape feature instead of doing it with a building. 2 raised planters that delimit a central pond with a vortex seen from the upper plaza. The oblique interior trace of the planters, like a fugue, produces an even greater sensation of depth in the space, a water enclosure. This is the second moment in the landscape narrative where the water vortex recalls the myth of the goddess Nakawe drying the waters to the ocean, and then the emergence of the lake and the island.
The second building was placed in the east part of the plot, producing a strong limit as it is a very long piece. We implemented a shingle-style cladding for exterior walls and roof, a resource that we love and that we have seen in San Francisco, Boston area, and many other places, but that in reality is a form that we can find in the traditional architecture of many regions. In Mexico, we know it as tejamanil, and we decided to use it with a very traditional local ceramic product. Containing dance and music halls, cafeteria, and other services, the project takes advantage of the topography, transforming its section from a 1-story to a 2-story building. In the middle part of it, a steel structure with a textile covering where the amphitheater is placed holds open circus events. In the upper floor, there is a dance room characterized by an overhead light that runs through the entire vault. The interior of the space has been conceived as a long fugue in visual relation with the small open-air amphitheater. It is therefore a long internal perspective that responds to how the body moves through the space.
Here we can find another moment in the landscape narrative, an amate tree on a stone promontory, the islet that emerged from the lake, as an analogy that recalls the sanctuary of the Guerrero culture in Scorpion's Island, where a shaman grew an amate tree to found the sacred altar. The result is a lush vegetation garden surrounded by the portico space where different cultural activities take place, such as dance performances, musical receptions, and so on.
Finally, beyond the former portico space, a last and more intimate garden precedes a bedroom area that accommodates artists and who visit the cultural center. We transformed the existing wing by using brick and cladding and forming screens that protect the area from excessive solar radiation. The hybrid nature of the project, which means the pre-existing and the new, made us reflect on the possibilities of using the same material and its ability to meet different construction needs and to generate memorable spaces, resonating with Richard Sennett's idea of slow craft time enabling the work of reflection and imagination. One significant coincidence was that the first exhibition held in the Galleria was by the ceramist, Mexican ceramist and artist Jorge Wilmot, who wrote a beautiful poem to the ceramic.
Okay, the following project is about the construction of a weekend house in the outskirts of Tapalpa, a town located in the mountains south of the city of Guadalajara. The commission allowed us to question what the project of a country house for a large family should be like, where it was also possible to create most of the landscape from scratch. So the first action was to plant a pine oak forest in the periphery of the land, echoing the natural habitat of the mountains, and to regenerate the typical prairies of Tapalpa, which we see in this image, through the collection of seeds of the native flora to enhance a wild gardening. So just to explain briefly, the project that you will see did only have like 8 trees in total. So we basically produce most of the, the landscape and the gardening strategies.
In this way, we took advantage of the generous dimensions of the land to produce a series of moments in the landscape in relation to the house, such as groups, gardens, and enclosures. The first moment is an oval-shaped enclosed group planted with maple trees that also contain a horse stable. The second moment is an open group made of liquidambars as a reception for the entire place. And finally, we surrounded the house with mounds that function as a limit to avoid views from the street. The project for the horse stable is part of the stone enclosure that functions as an entrance threshold to the property. A series of stone bays with wooden roof and ceramic coverings are attached to the oval layout of the enclosure that captures a group as an interior landscape. This architecture is in fact a reinterpretation of the local construction system in which load-bearing stone walls support layers of wooden elements such as beams as formwork, and that is finally covered with traditional ceramic tiling. But we believe that the curve, in a way, the curved trace of the building modifies its aspect, giving a sense of contemporariness.
The house is organized using the central patio typology, accommodating a series of modules that contain public and private rooms, and in whose middle spaces we can find visions that escape towards the exterior landscape. This conception based on fragments refers to the idea of village understood as little town. To reinforce this idea, each of the rooms has a fireplace whose vertical geometry is clearly manifested in the general composition of the complex. In this image, we can see the relationship of the mound full of endemic vegetation with the house. Then a larger mound helps us to create a more intimate space within the landscape with a merge of ornamental and native flora. The landscape replicates the prairie character typical of the region.
The architecture proposed tries to recall many elements of the alpine tradition construction of that region, such as the use of wood, shutters, and lintels, but used in a contemporary way due to the abstraction process of the elements. We consider every project is an opportunity to develop a certain architectural grammar that is in fact the result of a work of translation or interpretation of the place. This is the reason for recalling the fragmented conception of the house that allowed us to accommodate a very large family in different rooms, a programmatic issue, and at the same time to transform a precedent observed in the vernacular way of constructing by addition in time.
We believe this is a project in which we could experiment with the idea of an architectural system where the form is not fully controlled by the architects in terms of composition. As methodology, we establish a series of material and formal rules that allow ourselves to play with a series of elements, encounters, and moments as it happens as well in the vernacular architecture. This idea produced certain moments that can be interpreted as made by chance, and we feel very happy with the result because the house is a very rich collection of places, spatial corners, and in the end we believe is an architecture conceived as a background in the landscape. The very act of entering the house is made by a promenade in between the walls and chimneys that delays the encounter with interior space, as it happens in Mexican traditional architecture, where the sense of wonder and amazement is still very important.
The juxtaposition of elements and materials may be different than many other examples of contemporary architecture, where a monochromatic design is in fashion, conveys the idea of domesticity, where the richness of experience as discovery is present. We as architects are committed with the design of every space and every element to keep as much as possible the narrative of the house experience. A space within a space is an idea largely developed by us in many projects that found a fortunate realization in this house because the interaction with our clients was very close and friendly, of course. The niches in each room are small spaces for children to sleep, to play, or to read next to the windows.
So every room has a particular character and simultaneously belongs to the global conception. In the background, we can see how the promontories keep an intimate view protected from the exterior. For us, every project is an opportunity to create a particular universe, to conceive an enclosed world with its own language.
In this sense, we feel very close to the architect John Hayduck, American architect, when he says, architecture also has to do with sound, but not sound in the pragmatic way, but an earthly sound. When you are in it, you are giving off the wavelengths of its sound. We feel very fortunate to have the possibility to still construct a house with traditional materials such as brick, wood, and stone. Many regions of Mexico still have a living artisanal workforce, and we believe we can contribute to perpetuate those crafts by including them in our architecture. Simultaneously, as we build a new house, additionally to provide a service, of course, we believe we are constructing ourselves. In every decision we make, we trace a new path to affirm ourselves in the presence of nature and in relation to the cosmos.
With the particularity of having a responsible developer, which is rare, interested in architectural quality, we were commissioned to carry out the project for a residential building located in Colonia del Valle neighborhood in Mexico City, where colonial mansions determine the urban image, along with outstanding examples of modern architecture. This project is part of a current research that we have named Mantegna Variations, where we have used the painter's Andrea Mantegna's own house in Mantova as a historical precedent to investigate about the spatial possibilities of circular-shaped spaces in the conception of strong and memorable spaces in which the void is the main theme. Our particular approach to typologies has to do with the idea of transformation at different levels. First, the election of a type able to solve certain human needs, for example, a portico space. Then, the election of a landscape typology which, blended with the architecture, could propose such a spatial transformation able to blur the boundaries of the two disciplines. In this case, a portico space is placed into a huge excavation that contains a garden at the bottom.
Of course, the order in the transformation process is not always the same. Sometimes we start with an architectural precedent, sometimes with a landscape idea, and so on. For example, when we had the opportunity to visit Casa di Mantegna in the city of Mantova in Italy, we came across this extraordinary spatial system that consists in a circular courtyard inscribed in a square body. The visit to the building made us reflect not only about a geometric relationship found in the courtyard, but we realized that we had understood wrongly the reality of the space until we were there. The geometric difference between the circle and the square produced no space in between. This deception made us want to transform the precedent, making way to something new as part of our Mantegna variations. The manipulation of a historical precedent has produced a central courtyard scheme that helped us to ventilate and illuminate the dwellings, of course, but with the objective in mind of transforming the kind of experience you have using stepping terraces and wide openings. The building is developed on 4 levels, housing 6 apartments. The main feature of the project is the interior courtyard to which all the dwellings can experience. The outline of the patio is an irregular oval shape, thus generating a unique spatial richness for each apartment. We have used a reinforced concrete structure along with other soft materials such as wood, bronzy, colored glass to enrich the tactile feeling of spaces. The building that is still a work in progress represents the idea of nostalgia and transgression, which in fact is the name of our next book, where a precedent taken is transformed and enriched using subjects as penumbra, solidity, deepness, monumentality, void, and many others.
In 2017, we were commissioned to develop a project for a tequila company in the north part of Jalisco state, in the place that we can consider as the typical Mexican landscape, which is part of the Trans-Mexican volcanic belt. That fire landscape that crosses our country has enabled the production of different ferments since pre-Hispanic times, which tequila is the most characteristic in the Mexican culture, of course. In other words, volcanoes and tequila are part of the same lineage, from the natural world to the culture produced by humans. As we have been working with the master plan and various building projects, we became very familiar with the nature of the place, with the topography and the flora. So we took the first decisions about zoning, having in mind all these natural elements in order to respect as much as possible the Quercus oak forest we found as a part of the property, placing the large production buildings in the west part of the land. As we wanted to relate as much as possible our project with the narrative of the volcanic origins of the landscape, we decided to work with the stone extracted directly from the site, having as a result the immediate adaptation of the architecture with the place in material terms, geological terms. As part of the landscape strategies, the stones are revealed in gardens to show that mineral layer of what exists below the subsoil and remains invisible most of the time.
At the beginning of our intervention, we said we were interested as a practice in the possibility of blurring the limits between architecture and landscape. So we took advantage on the opportunity of this project to carry out what we consider a hybrid between industrial architecture, craft, and landscape. As a first operation, and in order to obtain a flat platform where we could develop a 6,000 square meter building, we implemented a huge excavation in the slight slope of the natural topography. The client commissioned us to make a building for a warehouse with offices and other services. The implementation of a massive steel structure allowed us to obtain a flexible system that could house those different uses, applying variations whenever needed. The intention of using local materials such as typical ceramic elements locally produced and stone resulting from site excavation is related to the idea of anchoring the building to its geographical volcanic context, revealing the mineral substrate, that the same condition that allows the growth of agave species to produce tequila. But most importantly, with the conviction that using contextual materials could benefit regional producers and local artisan labor, which in fact is a fundamental part of the tequila company's philosophy. The use of structural buttresses, in addition to working as a reinforcement, gives the building a certain historical air that also interests us as disciplinary continuity. And the Soto roof evokes the most classic in industrial architecture. For us, the act of building is the ritual of architecture and is carried out through the craftsmanship, where construction techniques are knowledge passed from one generation to another. Those traditional construction systems were taken into another scale in order to produce an architecture capable of being read simultaneously as monumental, traditional, and contemporary.
The main idea for the building consisted in making it land into the ground, having in mind the difference in the pre-existing topography. So we asked ourselves, how can we make a structure that has something to do with the earth in a broad sense? How can we build something that can belong to the site at many different levels? Since we were asked to design a large-scale structure, we decided to make a building that had a topographical relationship with the land through an excavation to build what we call a ceramic horizon. This strategy will reduce its presence on the site, and in the same way, it recalls a land art operation that we admire so much. The excavation made in the topography was planned to produce a sensation of being partially underground and simultaneously protected from the climate. The slopes are that in-between space that produces a certain ambiguity, which does not allow us to know exactly where the landscape ends and the architecture begins.
The use of architectural elements such as double columns, beams, and bolts is a resource that has to do with our desire to impregnate our projects with something understood as the architectural characterization of the buildings, something that could be understood as the opposite of the abstraction process typical of modernity. This characterization is also achieved through the use of materials to produce a certain atmosphere in which both materials and forms collaborate. The interior of the nave is determined by an ethereal light that filters through the Soto roof openings, which have been treated with handmade glass one by one, making the space appropriate to populate it with barrels. The building, in its eastern part, functions as a pedestrian passage that distributes people both to the offices and to the production areas. When we imagine how this portico space could be, we remember some images of traditional Mexican architecture in which reunion and meeting rituals were possible. But at the same time, we try to manifest a certain air of monumentality that will dignify the user experience. We like to think that the true job of the architect is to be an interpreter, someone who knows how to read a site, who has the ability to make certain values visible, to consider certain conditions, and who in the end acts accordingly, translating all of this into a specific order.
Someone who has the ability to show us what was already present in a place and at a certain time, but that we could not see before. The creation of a sense of familiarity is very important in that process of interpretation that certainly manifests part of the personality of the author. But at the end, we believe a project is not supposed to be just a display of our own character. Suppressing the author's personality can lead to a certain sense of anonymity. Letting architecture express itself is, in a sense, an act of renunciation. In any case, we believe that the poetics of a space is something that cannot be imposed in advance, but something that is found in the development of the project. The architectural project is for us a process of discovery. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.